My name is Rachel Whitmore. I'm 29 years old, born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa, a place where the sky always feels a little too big and the sidewalks feel too quiet for dreams to grow. I live a quiet life. Too quiet, some might say. I work as a care coordinator at a private nursing home just outside the city, the kind of job where no one claps for you, but people's lives are a little warmer because you showed up. And I show up every day, clipboard in hand, smile practiced, paperwork done. But none of that really matters anymore, because the only thing I can think about is the sound of the front door slamming shut behind my grandmother, and the rain, that god-awful rain soaking through her coat, clinging to her skin like shame, and me, standing there like a coward, not saying a word, not moving, just watching. She had a suitcase in one hand. The other was wrapped tightly around an old embroidered handkerchief, the kind you don't see anymore, yellowed with time, edges frayed. I didn't even know it had meaning until the day my father ripped it out of her hands like it was nothing more than a piece of trash. He said, "You won't give us the money? Then get out." Just like that. That was his mother. And my mother? She didn't flinch. She crossed her arms and stood there, her voice calm and cold. "You made your choice, Mom. Don't act surprised." My grandmother didn't beg. She didn't ask for mercy. She just walked to the door with the silence of someone who had lost everything long ago and was only now being asked to make it official. I didn't know it then, but that night would divide my life in two, before and after. Before, I was the good daughter, the obedient one, the quiet one who never caused trouble. After, I was the one who leaked the footage, the one who showed the entire town what kind of people my parents really were. And the thing is, I hadn't even planned it. I just wanted to document it, for myself, to prove that I hadn't imagined it, that the gaslighting, the manipulation, the cruelty, they were real. But the truth has a way of refusing to stay hidden. And once I shared that video, once I let people see what happened behind the perfect white shutters of our colonial home, everything changed. My parents, respected, church-going, well-dressed, became the villains in a story they couldn't control. My grandmother, who spent her entire life being used, silenced, and forgotten, became the woman the town rallied around. And me? I finally found the strength I didn't know I had. But before I tell you how that all unfolded, you need to understand what led to that night. You need to know what kind of people raised me, and why, for so many years, I chose to believe their lies. I was 11 when I first realized that love in my house was conditional. My father, Gregory Whitmore, was the kind of man who thought every opportunity owed him something. He tried to start 4 businesses before I turned 18. A coffee stand, a landscaping company, a frozen yogurt truck, and a digital marketing agency. All failed. Every time he lost money, he blamed the economy, the employees, the regulations, never himself. And every time he came home angrier at the world, at Mom, at me. My mother, Linda, was colder, calculated. She didn't yell, she didn't raise her voice, but when she looked at you, it was like your heart shrank 2 sizes. She believed in reputation above all else. Our clothes were always pressed, our curtains always matched. If there was a scratch on the car, she'd schedule a detailing appointment before even asking what happened. We had family dinners every Sunday, even if no one spoke. Even if the air was so thick with tension, it felt like chewing broken glass. My grandmother, Lorraine, was never part of those dinners. I barely remembered her honestly. She lived in Montana, in a little cabin that backed up to a lake. I think I visited once, maybe twice as a child. I remember her folding quilts, humming softly, smelling like cinnamon and pine, and I remember my parents never talking about her, unless it was with tight lips and rolled eyes. She's stubborn. She thinks the world owes her. She's always been dramatic. So I stopped asking about her. I learned early that curiosity was punished and that silence was rewarded. It wasn't until I started working at the nursing home that the pieces began to shift. I saw daughters bringing their mothers hot meals, grandsons sneaking in strawberry milkshakes, husbands holding wrinkled hands and telling the same love stories again and again like they were brand new. And something inside me cracked. Was this what family was supposed to be like? Was it supposed to look like kindness without transaction? Love without a contract? That's when I got the news. Grandpa had passed away. And a month later, my parents sat me down over dinner and said, almost casually, "We're bringing your grandmother here to live with us." I looked up from my plate. "Grandma Lorraine?" I asked, trying to picture the woman I barely remembered. "Yes," Mom said. Her smile was too wide. "She's old, alone, and she needs family." But I knew that look. That wasn't compassion. That was strategy. I nodded. I didn't ask questions. I just helped move some old boxes out of the guest room and tried not to think too much about it, until the night she arrived. It was raining, not a soft drizzle, a bone-soaking downpour. And there she was, standing at our front gate in a tan wool coat, suitcase in one hand, her other wrapped around that same embroidered handkerchief. My father smiled as he opened the door, but there was no warmth in it. And my mother? She didn't even come outside. That's when I felt it, the unease, a feeling that something wasn't right, and that this house, the house I grew up in, the house I thought I knew, was about to become the stage for a betrayal so cold it would haunt me for the rest of my life. If you asked anyone who knew us from the outside, they'd probably say I had a normal childhood. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't starved. I went to school in clean clothes, my hair neatly brushed, my backpack zipped. But quiet harm doesn't always leave bruises. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just whispers for years. My father was never cruel in front of strangers. At church, he was Greg the helpful one. He shook hands hard, laughed too loud, offered unsolicited advice about car maintenance or landscaping or money-making schemes. My mother was a model of suburban perfection. PTA mom, holiday decorator, birthday party orchestrator. She always smelled like citrus and fabric softener. She smiled with her lips, but never with her eyes. And me? I learned how to fade into corners. I learned how to nod at the right moments, apologize for things I didn't do, and lower my voice when I had ideas that made them uncomfortable. The rules in our house weren't written, but they were sharp. Don't contradict Dad. Don't embarrass Mom. Don't ask for too much. One time, I got a 92 on a science quiz. I was so proud of myself. I'd studied for days. When I showed my father, he squinted at the page and said, "Why not 100?" He wasn't angry, just disappointed. That was worse. Mom didn't even look up from her planner. That night, I erased the little doodle I'd drawn in the corner of the page. I told myself I needed to try harder, but deep down, a small part of me wilted. The same thing happened again and again. A school play? Don't act too silly in front of people. An art contest? That's not a real career. An invitation to a sleepover? We don't know those people. No matter what I did, I was always too much or not enough. And somewhere between elementary school and high school, I stopped trying to impress them. I stopped showing them anything at all. My bedroom became my only safe space. The walls were covered in pages torn from magazines, not celebrities but landscapes, forests, oceans, cities far away from Iowa. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, headphones in, pretending the streetlights were city lights and the wind was ocean breeze. And I'd promise myself, one day I'll leave. One day I'll go so far they won't even be able to find me. But promises like that are easier to make when you're young, when you're older, when you're tired, when you're worn down by years of being invisible. It's not always so easy to break free. I didn't realize until much later that my parents weren't just emotionally distant. They were strategic. They knew exactly how to keep me quiet, how to shape me into the kind of daughter who wouldn't ask questions, who would play her role. It worked. For a long time it worked, until the day my grandmother walked back into our lives, until I saw what it looked like when someone finally refused to play by their rules. And the thing that terrified me most, she wasn't angry. She wasn't loud. She was kind. And in this house, kindness was the most threatening thing of all. My parents never had another child after me. No younger brother, no older sister, no twin I could silently connect with from across the table when everything felt unbearable. It was just me. And yet somehow, I always felt like a shadow in my own house. There was no golden child in our family. But that didn't mean there wasn't a ghost of one. Someone I was always being compared to. Her name was expectation. She didn't cry at dinner. She didn't get nervous in gym class. She didn't forget her lunchbox or doodle on math homework or ask why Dad's credit card kept getting declined at the grocery store. She was perfect, and I was always failing her. I once heard my mother talking on the phone with Aunt Sharon, her voice light and syrupy as she said, "Rachel's smart, but she's a bit sensitive. She's not exactly leadership material." I was 12, sensitive. That word followed me like a stain. It was always said with a smile, a warning, a way of saying, don't trust her reactions, don't take her too seriously, she feels too much. At first, I tried to become what they wanted. I joined student council. I practiced fake smiling in the mirror. I wore the stiff blouses my mom picked out for Sunday service, even though they made my skin itch. But the truth? I didn't belong in their idea of excellence. I wasn't polished. I wasn't made for dinner parties or Pinterest boards or matching holiday sweaters. I was the kind of kid who stared out windows for too long, who loved dogs more than people, who wrote sad poems on the backs of grocery receipts and shoved them into shoe boxes under my bed. And because I didn't fit the mold, they decided I wasn't enough. Not successful, not valuable, not useful. It wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was the way my father changed the subject when I talked about wanting to study psychology. Sometimes it was the way my mother's face tightened when I said I didn't want to go to business school. Sometimes it was silence, just long, heavy silence. You can learn a lot from silence. It teaches you how to fold your dreams small enough to fit in your pocket, how to bury your questions, how to make yourself smaller so you won't disturb anyone. So I did what quiet kids do. I excelled at disappearing. But when my grandmother arrived, all of that began to unravel. I hadn't seen her in over 15 years. She stepped into our house like someone stepping into a memory, soft, careful, and yet somehow unafraid. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid. She wore a pale green coat that didn't match her shoes, and she carried a single suitcase and a cloth grocery bag. But the thing I remember most, her eyes, warm brown, tired, but clear. She looked at me like she knew who I used to be, who I could have been, who I might still become. The first few days, she moved like a guest in a hotel lobby, quiet, polite, invisible. She cooked simple meals, lentil soup, fried cabbage with vinegar, warm bread with rosemary and olive oil. Meals my mother immediately dismissed as old-fashioned. She folded her laundry in perfect squares and kept her room spotless. She never raised her voice. She never demanded anything. And still, somehow, my parents were annoyed. I caught my mother complaining under her breath one afternoon while scrubbing the sink. I didn't sign up to be a nurse. And my father, I thought she'd be more helpful around the house. She just sits around. They didn't say these things to her face. Of course not. To her, they smiled, asked if she needed more tea, gently reminded her not to leave her things lying around. But when they looked at her, the real her, I could see it in their eyes. Resentment, like they had brought in a project they couldn't figure out how to control. I didn't know what to do with what I was seeing, because the woman who had always been spoken of like a burden, a relic, an emotional liability, was the only one in the house who noticed me, who listened when I spoke, who remembered how I liked my tea, with lemon, no sugar. She didn't tell me I was too sensitive. She asked what I was feeling. She didn't ignore my silence. She waited patiently beside it. And that presence, steady, quiet, real, made something dangerous start to wake up in me, something I had pushed down for years. Hope. Hope that I could be known. Hope that maybe I wasn't broken. Hope that I didn't have to disappear forever just to keep the peace. And as my grandmother began to settle in, I started noticing something else. My parents didn't bring her here out of love. They didn't bring her here because she was lonely. They brought her here for a reason, one they didn't want anyone to question. And I was about to find out what it was. Her room was the smallest one in the house, a narrow space at the top of the stairs that used to be the storage room. The ceiling sloped inward like it was trying to press down on whoever lived there. There was one small window facing the backyard, but the view was mostly blocked by the overgrown branches of a dying maple tree. My parents called it cozy. I called it punishment. They'd cleared out the boxes, laid down an old rug, and moved in a twin bed with a frame that squeaked whenever someone breathed near it. There was no closet, only a wall hook behind the door. And there, by the bed, sat her suitcase. It was the kind you don't see anymore, stiff brown leather with rusted clasps, worn edges, and a faded airline tag still dangling from the handle. She never unpacked it fully, not even after a month. She hung a few blouses on the hook, set a framed photo of her and Grandpa on the nightstand, laid a crocheted blanket over the bed, but the suitcase stayed closed most of the time. Except once. It was late. My shift had ended early, and I'd come home to find the house quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. My parents' car was gone. I climbed the stairs slowly, planning to head straight to my room, but paused outside Grandma's door. The light was on. The door was cracked, and there she was, sitting on the edge of her bed, the suitcase wide open on the floor. She didn't hear me at first. Her hands were gently sifting through folded linens, old photographs, envelopes yellowed with age, a leather-bound address book, a small wooden box with a cracked lid. Every movement she made had care in it, like she wasn't just touching things. She was listening to them. I don't know why I stayed watching, maybe because I felt like I was witnessing something holy. Eventually, she looked up. Her eyes didn't startle. She simply smiled, like she knew I'd come. "You're home early," she said. I nodded and stepped inside. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not. She motioned toward the floor, and I sat cross-legged beside her. What is all this? I asked quietly. My life, she said. She picked up a photo of a small cabin surrounded by trees. Your grandfather built this with his bare hands. I recognized the place instantly. The Montana cabin. I've only been there once. I was 8. I remember pine trees. You made cinnamon tea? Her smile deepened. You remember that? Yeah, I said. It was the first time anyone let me pick out my own mug. She chuckled softly. You chose the chipped one. I asked why, and you said, it's brave. I laughed quietly. That sounds like me. She reached into the suitcase and pulled out a small handkerchief, the same one she carried everywhere. White fabric, blue stitching. A single initial embroidered in one corner, L. My mother gave me this when I turned 18, she said. I carried it on my wedding day. It's seen everything. She folded it carefully and placed it back in the suitcase. For a while we said nothing, just sat there, surrounded by fragments of a life that had been lovingly preserved, not for display, but for memory. I didn't want to come here, you know, she said after a long silence. I figured. I was doing just fine in Montana. Lonely, yes, but peaceful. Then why did you come? She paused, her fingers brushing over an envelope with my father's handwriting on it. I thought, maybe your father meant it. Maybe he finally wanted to reconnect. Maybe I'd see you again. Her voice trembled on that last sentence, and I looked away. I'm sorry, I whispered. We should have visited more. You were a child. That wasn't your job. I wanted to ask her what the letter said, but I already knew. It was a promise, an invitation dipped in sugar and greed. And now she was here, boxed into a tiny room at the top of the stairs, surrounded by people who saw her not as a person, but as a bank account in a cardigan. The next day, I went back up to her room while she was out in the garden. I sat on the bed and stared at the suitcase. Everything in that small, frayed container meant something to her, and all my parents saw was what they could take from it. The photo of the cabin, the insurance documents, the property deed tucked in a corner beneath her winter socks. She hadn't come here to be cared for. She'd come here because she thought maybe, just maybe, love could still be found in a place that had once been home. But she didn't know this place had changed, that my parents were no longer people, but predators wearing polite smiles, and that I, their daughter, had spent so long surviving their coldness that I no longer recognized what safety felt like. I closed the suitcase gently and stood up. Something inside me shifted that day. Not just guilt, not just anger, resolve. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't looking at a suitcase. I was looking at evidence of who she was, of what they wanted, and of what I needed to protect. It started with tea, a simple gesture, a quiet cup placed on the table next to me one rainy afternoon. I had just come home from work, the kind of day that crawls under your skin. Endless meetings, a nurse called out sick, a patient sobbed for 3 hours because no one remembered his birthday. All I wanted was to collapse, maybe sleep for a week, but when I opened the front door, I smelled it. A warm, spicy aroma drifting down the hall like a memory. Cinnamon, ginger, something faintly herbal. I followed it to the kitchen. Grandma was there, wearing an apron I'd never seen before, soft blue with embroidered daisies. The sleeves of her cardigan were rolled up, her hands steady as she poured hot water into 2 ceramic mugs. She didn't speak, just glanced over, nodded, and set one mug in front of me. I sat, took a sip. The heat traveled all the way to my bones. Neither of us said a word for almost 5 minutes. The clock ticked. Rain tapped at the windows. The fridge hummed. And then, without looking at me, she asked, "Rachel, do you trust your parents?" I almost dropped the mug. Her voice hadn't been accusatory, not dramatic, just curious, like she was asking about the weather. But it cut through me like a blade. Do I trust them? I didn't know how to answer, not because the answer was unclear, but because I wasn't ready to admit it out loud. So I asked the question back. Do you? She smiled, not kindly, not bitterly, just truthfully. No, she said, not anymore. That silence returned, not the cold, choking silence I grew up with, but the kind that sits with you, makes space for truth. I think, I began slowly, I spent so long needing them to love me that I stopped noticing how little they did. Grandma's eyes softened. That's how it starts, she said. You make excuses for the small things, the comments, the looks. You tell yourself they're tired, they're stressed, they don't mean it. She paused. And then one day you realize you've disappeared. You've shrunk yourself so small just to survive in the spaces they gave you. I felt tears prick behind my eyes, not from pain, not yet, but from recognition. She saw me, in a way they never had, and I saw her, really saw her, not as a grandmother, not even as a victim, but as a woman who had once been young, once had dreams, once believed in family, until they taught her not to. Why did you come here? I asked again. She stirred her tea, watching the leaves swirl. Because your father said he wanted to start over, that he wanted me near, said he had plans for the family home, that we'd rebuild, reconnect. I believed him. She sighed. I didn't realize I was part of the plan, not part of the family. That sentence sat heavy between us. I reached for her hand, wrinkled, warm, still strong despite everything. She looked at me and whispered, Rachel, they want the house. I blinked. What? The Montana property. The cabin. They've asked me 3 times now to sell it. They say it's just sitting there unused, that I could live more comfortably if I cashed it in. My mouth went dry. And have you? Not yet, she said. I told them I'd think about it. But your father's been circling, like a vulture, smiling too much, helping with chores, asking about my health. She leaned closer. And your mother, she's already looking at granite countertops online. The nausea hit instantly. It all made sense now. The sudden invitation, the rushed preparation of her room, the performative kindness. They didn't bring her here to love her. They brought her here to wear her down, to corner her, to take what they couldn't earn. I stared down into my tea, the warmth now bitter on my tongue. How much is the house worth? I asked. Around $400,000, she said quietly. It was appraised a few years ago. That number rang in my ears. More than enough to clear their debts. More than enough to fund another one of Dad's doomed ventures. More than enough for Mom to keep pretending we were the kind of family she posted about on Facebook. Have you told anyone else? I asked. She shook her head. Just you. I swallowed hard. I want you to promise me something, I said. She nodded. Don't sign anything. Not without showing me first. Her eyes searched mine, and then she smiled. "I knew I was right to come back," she said softly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling in my room, trying to decide what terrified me more, what my parents were willing to do, or what I might be willing to do to stop them. Because something inside me had changed. I wasn't the silent daughter anymore, and I wasn't going to let them bleed her dry. Not this time. Not ever again. The first crack came not from a fight, not from shouting, not even from some dramatic confrontation. It came from a misplaced paper. I was walking past the dining room on a Thursday afternoon when I saw a folder left open on the table. Dad was outside talking loudly on the phone, pacing like a salesman desperate for a deal. Mom was in the kitchen, humming tunelessly as she dried dishes she hadn't washed. No one saw me pause. No one saw me pick it up. The top page read, "Authorization for property evaluation, Whitmore Family Holdings." And just below that, printed in neat, confident font, "Subject property, 42 Lakeview Ridge, Helena, MT." My heart froze. They'd already started. I flipped through the pages. Appraisal notes, agency emails, even a prepared sale agreement, all unsigned but real, official. There was a section labeled Heir Signature, Lorraine Whitmore. It was blank, not for long if they had their way. I quickly photographed every page with my phone, then slipped them back exactly where I found them. I didn't say anything that night. Instead, I waited. Waited for them to make their move. It came 2 days later, at dinner. The conversation started casual, almost lazy. Dad passed Grandma the salad bowl and said, "So, Mom, we were thinking, maybe it's time you had less to worry about. All that property management stuff in Montana must be a lot to handle, right?" Grandma smiled politely. "It's not so bad." He laughed a little. Sure. But it's just sitting there. Wouldn't it make more sense to let it go? Liquidate the asset. You could use that money to fix up your room here, maybe even take a trip. You've always wanted to go to Italy, right? That was the tell. My father never remembered details like that. He was using my words, a story I'd told him years ago, about how Grandma once said she wanted to see Venice before her legs got too tired. He'd been listening, not out of love, out of leverage. Grandma dabbed her lips gently with her napkin. "I haven't decided anything yet." My mother jumped in, all sugar and steel. "Well, no rush, but we did talk to someone at the bank, just to get some information." Totally informal. I watched her smile tighten. The same smile she used with nosy neighbors and sales clerks she didn't respect. That night, I knocked on Grandma's door. When she opened it, I handed her my phone. She scrolled silently through the photos. With each swipe, her eyes grew heavier. When she reached the final page, she exhaled. "I see," she murmured. "I'm sorry," I said. She shook her head. "You're the first one who's told me the truth in years." She walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back. The yard below was still, moonlight tracing the grass in silver streaks. "When I was your age," she said softly, "I almost left your grandfather." I blinked. "What?" She smiled faintly. "He wasn't cruel, but he was stubborn, cold, always chasing business schemes. Sound familiar?" I nodded slowly. "But then I got pregnant, and then another baby. And suddenly, I wasn't Lorraine anymore. I was wife, mother, housekeeper, banker, nurse. I wore every role except my own name." She turned to look at me. "I stayed because I thought it was the right thing to do, because that's what good women did. They endured. They forgave. They hoped things would get better." A pause. I was wrong. The air shifted. She wasn't fragile in that moment. She was steel-wrapped in velvet. "Rachel," she said, "I'm not giving them that house. Not now. Not ever." My throat tightened. What if they push harder? "Then I'll push back," she smiled. "And I think I have someone in my corner now, don't I?" Tears burned behind my eyes. Always. The next few days passed like walking a tightrope. My parents acted normal, which made it worse. Dad laughed more than usual. Mom made pancakes on a Wednesday. They were performing peace, trying to lull her into submission. But we were already ahead of them. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer the following week. A woman named Caroline Ruiz. Sharp eyes, warmer heart. She'd helped a few residents at my workplace with estate protections, and she agreed to meet us after hours. We made the plan, filed the papers, sealed the will, locked down the cabin. By the time my parents realized what had happened, it would already be untouchable. And still, the guilt haunted me. Because this wasn't just about property, it was about seeing them for who they were, really seeing them, not the roles they played, not the myths they told at barbecues or holiday dinners, but the truth, that they would rather strip their own mother of her dignity than earn something for themselves. And I had to admit to myself, I'd let it go on for too long. I'd let them shape me, dull me, convince me that smallness was safety, but not anymore. The first crack in the mirror had formed. The image I once believed in, the myth of my family, was breaking. And I wasn't going to look away this time. I was going to make sure the whole truth came out. The rain had been falling for hours, not a gentle drizzle, but a heavy, relentless storm. Like the sky itself was tired of pretending everything was fine. Inside the house, the air was electric. I had just come back from Caroline's office, a manila envelope tucked safely in my purse, containing the notarized documents protecting Grandma's property, her will, and the statement of financial coercion we'd drafted in case things escalated. I hadn't told my parents. Not yet. I was waiting. Waiting for the moment their masks slipped. Waiting to catch them without the disguise. That night, it happened. I was sitting in the hallway just outside the living room, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the red record button. The voices inside rose and fell like a tide. First, my mother's voice, smooth, practiced, dangerous. "I don't understand why she's dragging this out. It's not like she's going to need that house. What is she even holding on to it for? Ghosts?" Then my father, "She's being selfish. We took her in. We feed her. We give her shelter. And she acts like we're thieves. She's playing the victim," Mom snapped, "like she always does. We should have made her sign weeks ago." My stomach turned. Then came the part that changed everything. Dad lowered his voice, but not enough. "I've had enough of her games. If she doesn't sign by the weekend, we tell her to get out. Let her figure out where to go in the middle of a storm." I hit record. The screen glowed red. Every word that followed, every cruel plan, every manipulative threat, captured in crystal clarity. They didn't know I was listening. They didn't know the daughter they trained to stay quiet had finally picked up a weapon they never expected. The truth. 20 minutes later, the recording ended. I crept back upstairs, heart pounding, hands shaking. I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling, the audio still playing in my ears. It was all there, and yet, a voice inside me whispered, "Is this really what you're going to do? Expose your own parents? Destroy your family?" But another voice, stronger now, said, "They did that on their own. You're just showing the world what already exists." I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I brewed a pot of coffee and brought Grandma a cup of tea. She was already sitting by the window in her robe, watching the rain slide down the glass like tears too tired to fall. She looked up as I entered. "They're going to try something soon," she said quietly. I nodded. "I know, and I'm ready." She sipped her tea. Her hands trembled slightly. "I hate that it came to this." "Me too." "I never wanted to hurt them," she said. "Even after everything, I still hoped." I sat down beside her. "I know," I whispered, "but hope shouldn't cost you everything." She turned to me. "Do you have it?" I pulled out my phone, played the recording. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "So now they're willing to throw me out." Again. "Not this time," I said. She looked at me, and I saw it. The shift. The ache replaced by steel. "Then let's make sure they don't do this to anyone else." That was the moment. The real turning point. Not the recording. Not the paperwork. It was the decision. The decision that we, not they, would define the ending of this story. Together. It was always about appearances with them. Always. To the outside world, my parents were the picture of respectable middle-class grace. My father, active in the local Rotary Club, always offering to help neighbors shovel snow or host block parties. He shook hands too tightly and laughed at his own jokes, just a little too long. My mother, a real estate agent with the perfect smile. She baked cookies for open houses, posted family photos on social media with carefully worded captions like, "Thankful for moments like these. Family is everything." They waved at the mailman, donated canned goods to church drives, attended every Christmas Eve service dressed in matching red. But behind that glossy, polished exterior lived rot, and it was spreading. I didn't fully understand how far they were willing to go until the fundraiser. It was a Saturday afternoon, bright sun, cold wind, one of those crisp Midwest days where everyone pretends it's spring but still wears gloves. The church was hosting a charity bake sale and silent auction. My mother had signed up to donate gift baskets, 2 of which, ironically, were filled with teas my grandmother had bought. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed to be there. And I was right, because that's where I heard it. Mrs. Sanders, a church deacon's wife, approached me by the coffee table. "Rachel, I didn't know you were back in town. Your mom said you were living in Chicago?" I blinked. "No, I live here. I've always lived here." She laughed. "Oh, silly me. Maybe I misunderstood. I just know your mother said the house has been a bit crowded lately. Something about giving your grandmother's place in Montana to charity." My stomach dropped. "What?" She sipped her cocoa. "Yes, she said they were in the process of donating it. So generous, really. That old place out in the woods, no plumbing. I said they could probably get a tax write-off for it. And she smiled and said, 'We're just doing what's right.'" I couldn't breathe. They weren't just trying to take the house. They were rewriting the story, making themselves the heroes again. I left the fundraiser early, walked the 6 blocks home through freezing wind, my mind reeling. I could see it all so clearly now. They had built a narrative, that Grandma was helpless, that they had rescued her, that they were sacrificing their space, their time, their comfort, to care for a woman no one else would. And now they were preparing to gift her property as if it were theirs to give, as if they were saints. By the time I reached the front porch, my fingers were numb. Not just from cold, but from rage. Inside, Grandma sat on the couch, flipping through an old gardening magazine. She looked up, instantly alert. "What happened?" I told her. "Everything. The fundraiser, the lie, the donation." She sat quietly, her face unreadable. After a moment, she said, "They've already talked to someone. About the house." I froze. "What?" "I found a business card in your mother's purse last week. A man from a property development firm, Helena-based. I didn't say anything because I hoped I was wrong." I sank into the armchair. "They're going to sell it, aren't they? Flip the story, make themselves look charitable, and pocket whatever's left." She nodded slowly. "Unless we stop them first. We had the documents, we had the recording, but what we didn't have yet was an audience. They had the town wrapped around their smiles. If we were going to change the narrative, we'd have to do it where it hurt them most, publicly. Not for revenge, but for truth, so people would know, so they couldn't do it again." That night, I uploaded the audio file to a private YouTube link. I stitched together clips, photographs of my grandmother through the years, screenshots of the forged documents they had prepared, the gift basket receipts from the bake sale that included items she bought. And then, at the end, I added a photo, a simple one. Grandma sitting in the Montana cabin, smiling at the camera, the light hitting her just right, the handkerchief on her lap. Below it, I added the caption, "They said she was a burden. She gave them everything." I didn't make it public, not yet, but the fuse was lit, and the explosion was coming. It took me 2 more days to gather the courage, 2 days of pretending, 2 days of nodding through conversations, of smiling when my mother said, "Don't you think Grandma's been sleeping a lot lately?" Of biting my tongue when Dad said, "The market's great right now. We'd be fools not to sell." They didn't know I was preparing their unmasking. But on the 3rd day, the silence in me broke. It started with a post, a single sentence, no explanation. Sometimes the ones who claim to save you are the ones holding the knife. Then I attached the private YouTube link, and I clicked public. I didn't expect it to spread like wildfire. At first, just a few likes, a comment or two, then someone shared it, then someone else. By midnight, the video had 1,200 views, by morning over 50,000, and the town, our little town that cared more about decorum than truth, was buzzing. I woke to a flood of messages, some from strangers, some from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. "Rachel, is this real? I always felt like something was off with them. Now I know why. Thank you for standing up for her." But the ones that mattered most came from the quiet corners, women I didn't even know. This reminded me of what my father did to my grandmother. I didn't speak up. You did. I cried watching this. "Thank you for protecting her. We believe you." The tide had turned. My parents didn't call. They didn't text. But I heard the car leave around noon. Fast, like they were fleeing something on fire. Grandma and I sat in the kitchen in silence, the laptop open on the table, watching the numbers rise. At one point, she turned to me and whispered, "Am I safe now?" I reached for her hand. "You've always deserved to be." That night, the video made the local news. Not just the online version, but the real thing. The evening broadcast. There was our living room, blurred in the background. There was a photo of Grandma, the one from the cabin. The caption below read, "Daughter exposes family's elder abuse in viral video." I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, I felt something break loose in my chest, like a door swinging open after years of being locked. relief, truth, light. By the next day, the phone was ringing nonstop. Church friends, neighbors, even a few clients my mother had sold houses to. Some called to apologize, some called to ask how they could help. And one woman, Mrs. Harris, who used to babysit me, said, "Rachel, if you ever need a place to stay, my guest room is yours." Because, of course, the fallout was coming. My parents returned late that night. No knock, no warning, just the sound of the front door slamming and heavy footsteps charging down the hallway. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, waiting. My father's face was purple with rage. "What the hell did you do?" My mother followed behind, eyes narrowed, voice sharp. "You think this is justice? Humiliating your own family?" I didn't flinch. "You did that to yourselves," I said. "I just told the truth." "You're destroying our lives," my father roared. "Do you know how much damage you've caused? I've lost 3 clients. Your mother tried to steal property from a woman you dragged into this house under false pretenses," I cut in. Silence, cold, heavy, and then my mother's voice dropped into a hiss. "You ungrateful little girl, after everything we gave you." Grandma stepped forward then. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "You didn't give her anything. You took. From me, from her, from this family's dignity." She held up the manila folder, the one with the final documents Caroline had helped us prepare. "This is done. You have no legal access to the cabin, no claim, no leverage. If you try anything else, we go to court. And believe me, the court already knows." My parents froze. Dad's hand clenched into a fist, then relaxed. Mom opened her mouth, but nothing came out. And then they left. No bags, no final word, just the sound of the door closing behind them. And just like that, the house was quiet again, not with fear, but with peace. Grandma turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see this day." I hugged her, tighter than I ever had. "You're home now," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. In the days that followed, the house was still, but it wasn't the cold, pressured silence I had grown up with. This silence breathed, it healed, it gave space, and yet it still ached. I'd always dreamed that standing up to them, to my parents, would feel triumphant, like fireworks in the sky, a soundtrack swelling, the crowd rising to its feet. But real life isn't a movie. Sometimes winning doesn't feel like victory. It feels like sitting at the kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee, staring at the doorway where they used to stand, and realizing you don't miss them. You miss the version of them that never existed. They hadn't come back, not to apologize, not to plead. They simply vanished, blocked me on every platform, didn't respond to messages from concerned relatives, stopped returning calls from our church. They weren't ashamed. They were embarrassed. There's a difference. Shame is when you recognize the wrong. Embarrassment is when you're angry you got caught, and they had been caught, on camera, in audio, in writing. There was no spinning the truth anymore. But still, that didn't mean peace arrived overnight. Grandma and I spent a lot of time in the garden. The earth had started to soften with spring, and she loved kneeling in the dirt, fingers working like she was sculpting something back into life. "Gardens are honest," she told me one morning. "You put in what you're willing to give. You can't rush it, you can't manipulate it, you just have to show up." I realized, listening to her, that I'd never been allowed to grow in this house, only perform. I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who cried too easily, who wrote poems in the margins of her notebooks, who once chose a chipped teacup because it was brave. She hadn't been weak. She had just been too soft for a hard world. And now, sitting beside the woman they tried to discard, I finally understood. It wasn't my softness that needed fixing. It was their cruelty that needed naming. That week we started sorting through old things, drawers, closets, trunks left unopened for decades. It wasn't just about cleaning. It was about reclaiming. There was one box tucked in the attic, labeled simply Lorraine, 1975. Inside were letters, hundreds, from her sister, from her college roommate, from Grandpa during his deployment. But one caught my eye. It was addressed to Rachel Ann Whitmore. My name, but the date, was from 15 years ago. My hands shook as I opened it. It read, "My sweet Rachel, I don't know if your parents will ever give you this. I've sent others. No replies, no calls, no visits. But I need you to know, you are loved. I see your heart, even from far away. And I believe one day you'll find your voice. And when you do, it'll shake the ground." I didn't cry. I wept. Because even back then, when I thought no one was watching, no one cared, she saw me. She had always seen me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it by my nightstand. A reminder that truth has roots, even when it's buried, even when the world pretends it doesn't exist. It waits. And when the time is right, it rises. It arrived 3 weeks later, a small white envelope tucked inside a floral arrangement, lilies, roses, and some sprigs of lavender. Beautiful, really. Too beautiful. That's what made it feel like a threat. The florist left it on our porch with a smile. "For Miss Lorraine," he said. "Prepaid." Grandma hesitated before taking it. Something in her expression tightened, the way it always did when old wounds knocked on the door dressed in perfume and pleasantries. She opened the card carefully. 4 words written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. "We did our best." That was it. No name, no apology, no remorse, just a bouquet of denial. Grandma set the card down on the kitchen counter, stared at it a moment, then picked up the vase and carried the flowers outside. I watched through the window as she walked to the compost bin, opened the lid, and dropped the entire arrangement inside. Not a word, not a single glance back. Later that evening, she told me what the note really meant. "It's a warning," she said, her voice calm but unshakable. "It's them saying, we're still in control. We'll rewrite the story. And we'll do it with satin ribbon and scented paper." She was right, because the next morning the backlash began. Quiet at first, a whisper here, a sideways glance there. But it didn't take long to feel the tide shifting. People who had praised the video now started backpedaling. "I mean, it's not like we were there. We don't know what really happened." Families fight. That doesn't make them abusers. "She put it on the internet? That feels attention-seeking." There were new Facebook posts now, this time from my mother. Carefully curated, pity-angled. A daughter turns her back on the ones who raised her. Forgiveness is harder than revenge. Sometimes the real manipulation is hidden in the accusations. I stared at the screen in disbelief. She was gaslighting the entire town. And worse, some people were believing her. It shouldn't have surprised me. She knew how to play the victim. She'd done it her whole life. smiling with her lips, bleeding behind closed doors, then blaming others for noticing the wounds. But this time, I wasn't going to shrink. Grandma and I talked that night, over tea, always tea. "What if they turn everyone against us?" I asked. "What if no one believes the truth anymore?" She took a slow sip, then smiled. "Then we keep telling it anyway." I nodded. "But what if they show up again?" Her smile didn't fade. "Then we answer the door, with our heads held high." It was strange how peace had made her stronger, not softer. For so long, I thought healing meant hiding. But watching her now, planting things in the soil, calling her friends again, humming while she cooked, I saw that healing could be fierce. It could stare down the storm and say, "Try me." So we did what they couldn't. We lived. We baked cookies for the neighbors' kids. We watched old movies in our pajamas. We hung a wind chime on the porch, and every time it sang in the breeze, it felt like the house was learning how to breathe again. And then the letter came. This time, certified mail. From a lawyer, a cease and desist, claiming that the video had damaged reputations, incited defamation, and that if it wasn't taken down within 10 days, legal action would be pursued. I read it twice, then once more, out loud. Grandma didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to her bedroom, returned with a thin manila folder, and handed it to me. Inside was everything Caroline had helped us file. The notarized declarations, the time-stamped recording files, the original falsified sale documents with my father's handwriting, and even the statements from 2 neighbors who had overheard previous confrontations through the open windows. "We're not scared," she said. "Let them try." And I realized then they didn't want justice. They wanted silence. They wanted control. They wanted us to crawl back under the old rules, keep secrets, look perfect, never speak. But the door had been opened, and we weren't going back in. We didn't take down the video, not out of spite, not for drama. We left it up because it was the truth, and the truth doesn't belong in a box, even when it makes people uncomfortable, especially then. The legal threats fizzled. Their lawyer, clearly hired more for intimidation than action, stopped sending letters once we responded through Caroline. She sent a simple, airtight reply. "All claims made in the published material are supported by audio recordings, legal documentation, and personal testimony. My clients will not be removing the video. Further attempts at harassment will result in formal counterclaims." We never heard from him again. But my parents? They didn't go quietly. For a few more weeks, they tried to claw back their narrative. Posts on social media, carefully posed photos with friends, quotes about letting go of toxic energy and forgiving those who misunderstand you. At one point, my mother even gave an interview to a local lifestyle blogger. She talked about how hard it was to be misrepresented, how our daughter made some hurtful accusations that, while painful, have helped us learn about boundaries. Boundaries. That word curled in my stomach like a lie dressed as wisdom, because what she really meant was we lost control, and control had been the only thing they'd ever worshipped. But something strange happened after that interview. The town stopped reacting. People didn't rush to their defense anymore. The video was still being watched, quietly, consistently, but no one argued with us. No one messaged us with cruel things. Instead, they just backed away. My parents began to fade from view. Invites slowed. Clients dried up. Smiles became tighter, shorter, more forced. Their perfect image had cracked, and they couldn't glue it back together, not without acknowledging what they'd done, and that was something they'd never do. But the biggest change wasn't in them, it was in me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was building. I started writing again. Not poems and margins, but full, real stories. Stories about women who spoke up, who stood their ground, who found family in unexpected places and made homes where there had only been silence. I enrolled in an online writing program, just a few courses at first, but I felt it, the fire coming back. And Grandma, she thrived. She started volunteering at a senior center twice a week, leading a gardening club. She baked muffins for the staff and made friends with women who had stories as wild and tender as hers. We started calling our little home the greenhouse, not because it was green, it wasn't. It was actually an awful shade of beige, but because things grew here. Truth, joy, laughter, healing, and yes, sometimes grief. There were still moments I missed the idea of a mother, of a father. Sometimes I'd see a father walk his daughter down the aisle in a wedding video and feel a tug, or hear a woman on the phone saying, "Mom, you'd be proud of me," and feel a pang. But I didn't stay in that ache, because I had something better. I had clarity. I had freedom. One afternoon in early summer, a letter arrived. No flowers this time, no threats, just plain white paper, typed, no signature. "We won't reach out again. You've made your choice. Just know, this family could have been whole if you hadn't turned on us. We hope you find peace in your version of the truth." I read it once, then handed it to Grandma. She didn't say anything at first, just folded it into a neat square and placed it under the leg of a wobbly table. "Let it serve a purpose," she said with a wink. And that was that. We never heard from them again, and the truth is, I don't need to. There will be no dramatic reunion, no tearful apology, no final showdown, because the final act wasn't vengeance. It was walking away, without bitterness, without begging, without turning back, just walking forward, toward something new, something real, toward the life they tried to convince me I didn't deserve. And step by step, I claimed it, for myself, for her, for every person who's ever been told to stay silent to keep the peace. And you know what? The peace we found without them was louder than any apology they never gave. It's strange, the way grief moves in. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, subtle, like fog. You think you're done with it. Then it drifts back through an open window, even after everything, the lies, the betrayal, the silence. I still grieved the version of my parents I'd invented. The mom I wished had hugged me when I cried. The dad I thought might come to my high school play. The warm holiday dinners I imagined, where no one walked on eggshells or smiled with their teeth clenched. I had to let those people die, not because they were gone, but because they never existed. And in their absence, I discovered something unexpected. Space, room to breathe, room to build. Because sometimes the greatest gift isn't reconciliation. It's release. I didn't need their love to thrive. I needed their absence to begin. And I wasn't alone anymore. Grandma was with me every step. She taught me how to grow herbs in windowsills, how to fix a leaky faucet without calling a plumber, how to speak with clarity, not volume. But more than anything, she taught me that family isn't made by blood. It's made by choice. That summer, we started hosting Sunday dinners, something I never thought I'd want to do again. We invited neighbors, friends, co-workers, anyone who felt alone or overlooked. There were mismatched chairs, potluck casseroles, and laughter that filled every corner of the house. No forced smiles, no pretenses, just people showing up as they were. One Sunday, near the end of July, I looked around the table, at Grandma pouring iced tea into mason jars, at a young couple from next door feeding their toddler mashed potatoes, at my best friend from high school who'd driven 2 hours just to bring peach pie. And I felt something click into place. This was family. Not the kind that demands loyalty while offering pain. Not the kind that takes and calls it tradition, but the kind that sees you, that roots for you, that doesn't need you to shrink to fit their comfort. I hadn't just escaped something, I had built something new. And that was the real revenge, not making them suffer, not proving them wrong, but living well, living free. Grandma said something that night as we cleaned dishes shoulder to shoulder. "You know what I think?" "What?" I asked. "I think they were afraid of you, afraid of the power you had, even as a little girl. The power to feel deeply, to speak clearly, to love without conditions. That's a dangerous kind of power in a house built on secrets." I set the sponge down. "I think you're right." She smiled. "That's why they tried to dim your light. But guess what?" I looked up. "They failed." That night, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked, the page waited, and I began to write. My parents said my grandmother was a burden, but they were wrong. She was the roots, the reason I still believe in love that doesn't hurt, and I will never again apologize for choosing her. It started with the porch. The old wood slats had warped over time, warped just enough that every step let out a tired groan. Most people would have torn it out and replaced it. But Grandma had other plans. She said, "Let's restore it, not erase it, like us." So, together we sanded, we painted, we tightened screws, stained the planks a honeyed chestnut color, and laid down a new welcome mat that said, "Come as you are." And slowly, the house began to change, not just physically, spiritually. It stopped being a place of surveillance and tension. It stopped being a stage for performance and pretense. It became a home, one that held truth in its beams and kindness in its corners. Grandma started hanging things on the walls again. Photos of the cabin in Montana, pressed wildflowers, a painting she did in watercolor of a cardinal in winter. I placed the letter she wrote me, the one I found tucked away in the attic, in a frame above my writing desk. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the version of me she saw when no one else did. I was learning how to see that version, too. Not the quiet, scared girl who flinched at raised voices. Not the people-pleaser who said, "I'm fine," when she wasn't. But the woman who stood up. The woman who didn't let fear win. One evening, just before autumn arrived, we sat out on the new porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky turn orange and lavender. The breeze carried that unmistakable shift, the kind that whispers that summer is packing its bags. "I think this is my favorite season," Grandma said. "Why?" "Because it's honest. Fall doesn't lie about what's coming. It prepares you. It sheds. It lets go of what's no longer needed. It doesn't fight change. It leans into it." I smiled. "Kind of like us." She reached over, squeezed my hand. "Exactly like us." We didn't talk about my parents anymore. There was nothing left to say, not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer ruled the room. Sometimes grief isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet knowing, a settled sadness that doesn't beg for attention anymore. And that's where I had arrived. I didn't hate them. I just didn't need them, not in the way I thought I once did. They were part of my beginning, but they would not define my ending. In late September, I submitted my first essay to a magazine, a story about legacy and gardens, and how sometimes the person you were told was weak turns out to be the strongest one of all. It was published, small corner of a regional journal, but it was real. Grandma cried when she saw it. I didn't. I just smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need validation, because I knew who I was now. Not a girl trying to earn their love, not a woman seeking revenge, just me, whole, unapologetic, free. And this house, this once silent house, echoed with joy now. Every creak of the stairs, every wind chime whisper on the porch, every sound of laughter in the kitchen, it all said the same thing. You are safe here. You are seen here. You are loved. Not because you perform, but because you exist. I think if the walls could talk, they'd say this place was never broken. It was just waiting for love to move back in. And now, love had rebuilt everything. Sometimes family isn't who raised you. It's who stood by you when everything fell apart. They said my grandmother was a burden, but in the end, she was the only one who ever saw me. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about waking up, about standing your ground even if your voice shakes, and about choosing to build love where others tried to plant control. So if you've ever been made to feel like you're too much or not enough, if you've been told to stay silent just to keep the peace, let this be your reminder. You have the right to speak, you have the right to walk away, and you are not alone. If this story touched something in you, let us know in the comments. Tell your story, or share it with someone who needs to hear this one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss another story that speaks truth. Because sometimes healing begins when we finally say, enough, and choose ourselves.